In Dry Creek, news traveled faster than the wind, but nothing spread louder than laughter aimed at a man who dared to love differently. The town of Dry Creek was a place where dust clung to boots, secrets clung to whispers, and pride clung to every man's back like a badge. Wooden storefronts stood crooked along the main road, their windows dim and their doors creaking with age. At noon, the blacksmith's hammer rang like a warning bell, and at night, the saloon spilled light, music, and voices into the street. It was a town built on hard work and harder judgment. For years, the cowboy had walked these streets with the kind of respect men envied. He wasn't the richest rancher, nor the loudest gunslinger, but he was steady. His silence commanded attention, his hands carried the weight of work, and his gaze was the kind that could stop an argument before it started. People trusted him because he asked for nothing and delivered everything. He was the man you wanted beside you in a storm or a fight. That image began to crumble the day he married her. She wasn't what Dry Creek expected for him. She wasn't strong in body, nor lively in spirit the way the saloon girls were. She walked with uneven steps, her limp noticeable with every move she made. Her beauty was quiet, fragile, and easy to miss if you only looked at the surface. And to a town that measured worth by appearance, her weakness was unforgivable. The whispers started soft. Women exchanging glances in the general store. Men chuckling into their whiskey at the saloon. Children repeating what they heard at home. The cowboy married a cripple. It wasn't said with pity. It was said with scorn, as though his choice had insulted them all. He heard them. He wasn't deaf to the voices that followed him down the street, nor blind to the stares that cut sharper than any blade. But he refused to bow his head. He walked tall, always with her hand tucked into his arm, guiding her gently across the uneven boards of the sidewalk. She tried to avoid their eyes, but she could feel the weight of them pressing on her back. The worst cruelty was not in the words, but in the silence. The way people stepped aside, the way conversations stopped the moment she entered a room. What made the wife? It punished him for loving her. And yet, behind closed doors, the cowboy was different. He wasn't the stone-faced man the town saw. He was tired, though he hid it well. Sometimes, when the desert wind rattled their small home, he sat in silence too long, as if he were fighting an invisible weight pressing down on him. He never spoke of regret, but regret lived in the shadows of his thoughts. His wife knew it too. She could see it in the way his jaw tightened when laughter followed them through the street, or how his fists clenched at his sides when whispers turned louder. She worried not for herself. She had carried the world's cruelty since childhood. She worried for him, for the respect he had lost, and the anger that brewed in his chest. The days stretched into weeks and the whispers grew bolder. At first they had been confined to corners and back rooms. Now they rose openly, spilling into doorways and windows. A man couldn't cross Main Street without hearing something sharp about the cowboy's foolish mistake. And still the cowboy refused to lower his eyes. He wore his silence like armor, but even armor dents under enough blows. Then came the evening that changed everything. The sun was sinking low, staining the horizon blood red, and the air was thick with the smell of whiskey and smoke from the saloon. The cowboy walked with his wife at his side, their steps slow, steady, unbroken. The laughter from inside the saloon rolled out into the street, louder than usual, meaner than usual. This time it wasn't hidden in whispers. As they passed, a voice rose above the piano music and chatter, cutting through the night like a knife. "Well, if it ain't the fool who traded his pride for pity!" The street went silent. Every eye turned to the cowboy. His wife froze, her hand trembling against his arm. The music inside faltered, laughter hanging in the air like smoke. The insult had left whispers behind. It was now a public challenge. The cowboy's steps slowed. For the first time since the mocking began, he stopped walking. The town waited, breath held, as the man who had never lowered his eyes finally turned toward the saloon door, struggle in the open. But he reined in his horse and dismounted, drawn to her without knowing why. When he offered help, she refused at first. There was pride in her voice, sharp enough to cut. Yet as the rain began to fall, she accepted his hand. That single moment, her weight leaning against him, her eyes meeting his in the storm, lit something inside the cowboy he couldn't name. He had fought outlaws, drought, and loss, but he had never faced a woman who challenged his strength simply by standing unafraid in her weakness. Her limp became clear to him then, not as a shame, but as a story. She had been injured as a child, trampled by a runaway horse, and though doctors tried, her leg never fully healed. The town never let her forget it. They called her crippled, whispered that she was cursed, and treated her like a shadow. She had grown used to the cruelty, but what she hadn't grown used to was kindness, and that was what unsettled her most about the cowboy. At first, their meetings were small, passing conversations on the road, a shared nod at the market, a pause at the well where he insisted on carrying her bucket. But those moments built something larger. He admired the way she refused to bend to the town's pity. She admired the way he saw her without flinching. Slowly, the space between them narrowed, until it was no longer chance that brought them together, but choice. For the cowboy, it was simple. He had lived a life where strength was measured by silence and fists. But with her, strength meant something else. It meant gentleness. It meant listening. It meant carrying another's burden without complaint. For her, it was dangerous. Every time she accepted his company, she risked more ridicule. Yet the warmth she felt in his presence was worth the risk. The bond they built did not escape Dry Creek's notice. Whispers spread like wildfire. The cowboy was wasting himself on a woman unfit for him. Men at the saloon sneered that he must be desperate. Women muttered that she had trapped him with pity. Every step closer he took had made his. When he asked her to marry him, it wasn't with hesitation. It was with the same steadiness he carried into every fight. He placed a simple ring in her hand and said, "The world may laugh, but I'll stand by you until it breaks." She tried to protest, not because she didn't want him, but because she feared what it would cost him. Yet his eyes left no room for doubt. He was hers, no matter what the town thought. Their engagement became the final straw for Dry Creek. The whispers grew into jeers, the laughter louder, the judgment harsher. It wasn't enough for the town to disapprove. They wanted to teach him a lesson. They wanted to remind him that no man could defy their order and walk away untouched. On the night word spread that the cowboy had proposed, the saloon filled with talk not of cattle or weather, but of punishment. Men slammed their glasses on the bar and swore he had brought shame to them all. Some laughed, imagining ways to humiliate him. Others grew darker, whispering plans to make sure this marriage never brought him happiness. The storm that had begun with whispers was now rolling towards something far more dangerous. And so, long before the wedding bells ever rang, Dry Creek had already decided. It would make the cowboy pay for his choice. Her wedding veil was white, but their laughter was louder than the church bells. The church of Dry Creek had seen its share of weddings, but none like this. The morning sun spilled across the wooden pews, and the small bell above the door rang with a trembling sound, as though even it was uncertain of the day's blessing. Inside, whispers rattled through the crowd like rattlesnakes in dry grass. Every seat was filled, not out of love for the couple, but out of hunger for scandal. The bride entered slowly, her steps uneven, her veil trembling with each move. She clutched her bouquet so tightly the flowers bent under her fingers. Each limp forward felt like a mile, every step accompanied by muffled snickers and poorly hidden smirks. To her, the church was not a sanctuary. It was an arena, drowned by murmurs rippling through the pews. Some whispered mock blessings. Others muttered curses under their breath. A few laughed openly, the sound cutting into the sacred moment like a knife. Still, the cowboy never shifted. He held her hand firmly, letting the pressure of his grip tell her everything words could not. That she was safe, that she was chosen, that she was his no matter what. His silence wasn't weakness, it was his shield. And through it, he told the town he would not bow to their cruelty. The bride, though trembling, drew strength from him. Each time laughter echoed in the rafters, she felt his hand tighten. Each time a cruel whisper slithered across the aisle, she found her own breath steadying. Together, they formed a wall no insult could easily break. Yet the tension inside the church grew like storm clouds gathering over the desert. By the time the preacher spoke of unity, the division in the room was clear. On one side stood love, fragile but unyielding. On the other stood mockery, cruel and relentless. Every word of the vows became a declaration of war, not against each other, but against the entire town. When it came time for the final words, the cowboy's voice rang deep and steady. I take her, as she is, for all my days. It silenced some of the room, but not all. His words were met with bitter laughter, louder this time, echoing like thunder against the wooden walls. The bride's eyes glistened with unshed tears, not from shame, but from a quiet, aching pride. She had never imagined someone would stand so tall for her. Not in a town that had called her worthless all her life. For the first time, she believed her worth was greater than their judgment. Yet the crowd was not moved. The moment the preacher pronounced them man and wife, the church erupted. Some clapped mockingly. Others stomped their boots as though jeering at a circus. What should toward the source? Fear flickering in eyes that had moments ago danced with cruelty. Even the preacher froze, his mouth open, his hand trembling over his Bible. The cowboy's jaw tightened, his hand gripping hers so hard she could feel the storm in him. The bride's breath caught, her heart hammering in her chest. It was no longer just laughter they faced. It was something darker, something that threatened more than dignity. The vows had been spoken, but the curse hung heavier than the bells. And for the first time, the town's mockery felt like the beginning of something far more dangerous. Marriage was supposed to be peace, yet each day was a battlefield. The vows had been spoken, the rings exchanged, but the curse lingered in Dry Creek like smoke that refused to clear. For most couples, marriage marked the beginning of warmth and belonging. For the cowboy and his bride, it marked the start of open war. Their home sat on the edge of town, a modest cabin the cowboy had built with his own hands. Its porch overlooked the endless plains, and in the evenings, the sun painted the horizon gold. It should have been a sanctuary. Instead, the house became a target. Neighbors no longer stopped to greet them. Merchants raised prices when the bride appeared at the store. Some refused service altogether, claiming their shelves were empty when she asked for flour or oil. It wasn't just inconvenience. It was punishment, carefully delivered with a smile that masked cruelty. The cowboy bore it with silence. Each insult, each denial, he accepted without bending his head. He found ways around the town's cruelty. trading with passing travelers, riding farther out to buy supplies. But every ride, every workaround, was a reminder of the price he paid for love. His shoulders grew heavier, not from labor, but from the weight of scorn pressing down on him. The bride felt it too. Walking through town had once been difficult. Now, it was unbearable. Women turned their backs when she approached, their conversations snapping shut like doors. Children mocked her limp, open love wither under the weight of cruelty, hardened her resolve. The cowboy saw the changes in her. She smiled less, spoke less, but her eyes burned with something unfamiliar. Sometimes, as she watched him repair a fence or saddle his horse, he caught her staring as though she were measuring her own strength against his. He never asked what she was thinking. He respected her silence as much as she respected his. But in his heart, he feared what silence might grow into. Their private world became both haven and prison. At night they sat together on the porch, the stars wide above them. The cowboy read aloud from an old book, his voice steady against the hum of the crickets. She leaned into him, drawing comfort from his presence. Yet even in those quiet moments, the weight of the town pressed in, reminding them that peace was fleeting. One afternoon when the cowboy returned from a ride, he found a dead crow nailed to their door. A crude message scrawled on a torn scrap of wood hung beneath it. "Love won't save you." He ripped it down without a word, burned it in the fire, and held her hand while she trembled. He never spoke of it again, but she knew. This was no longer just ridicule. It was hatred, growing bolder. Still, he refused to yield. Each day he worked the land, his sweat falling like rain into the dry earth. He repaired what was broken, built what was needed, and stood as though nothing could move him. To the world he showed strength, but to her, in rare moments, he revealed the cracks. She saw it in the way his eyes lingered on the horizon too long, or how his hand would tremble slightly when he thought no one noticed. The scorn was breaking him slowly, not through one blow but through 1,000 cuts. She could not let it continue. If their marriage was to survive, if love was to mean more than suffering, then she would need to find a way to rise above what had shackled her all her life. One evening, as the sun slipped low and shadows stretched long across the floor, she sat beside him in the dim glow, stirred something in him. Not fear, not doubt, but wonder. For days after, she was quieter than usual, but her silence was not the silence of despair. It was the silence of someone carrying a secret too heavy to share. She moved through their small cabin with purpose, her limp unchanged but her posture straighter, as though she were bracing herself for something larger than ridicule. The cowboy watched, waiting, knowing she would speak when she was ready. It was one night, beneath the vast sweep of desert stars, that she finally told him. They sat together on the porch, the air cool and still, the lantern burning low between them. Her hands trembled slightly in her lap as she turned to him. "There's something I've never told anyone," she whispered. "Something I've hidden, because people would laugh harder than they already do." He said nothing, only turned toward her fully, his gaze steady as stone. "I want to dance again," she said. The words landed like a thunderclap in his chest. Dance. The very thing her body had denied her since childhood. Dance. The symbol of grace she had been robbed of. To anyone else it would have sounded like madness. But to the cowboy, it was no madness at all. It was truth, sharp and raw. "I see myself in my dreams," she continued, her voice cracking. "Moving without pain, without shame. I see the music carrying me. I see people watching, not with pity but with awe. I know it sounds impossible, but I can't stop seeing it. He reached across and took her hands in his. "If it's your dream," he said, his voice low and steady, "then it's mine too, and I will do anything, anything to make it real." She broke then, not in weakness but in relief. Tears streamed down her face as she leaned against him. For years her dream had been a secret cage, something too fragile to share. Now, in the strength of his promise, it became something more, a hope, but hope of struggle. Nights were no longer just silence. They were filled with confessions and dreams. She told him of the childhood she had lost, the games she could never play, the dances she could only watch from shadows. He told her of battles he'd fought, wounds he'd carried alone, loneliness that had nearly swallowed him before she came. In each other they found not only love, but understanding, the kind that turned pain into strength. The town, of course, noticed the change. They saw the cowboy ride longer distances, heard rumors of his questions. They mocked him louder now, claiming he was chasing miracles for a woman who would always be broken. But the cruelty no longer had the same bite. For once, their scorn was met not with silence, but with a quiet defiance the town could not break. Yet even love and faith have limits. Weeks passed, and though their bond grew stronger, her body remained the same. Each morning her limp reminded her of the wall she could not climb. Each evening she tried to stretch her leg, whispering to herself that one day it would move the way she dreamed. And each night the cowboy held her, vowing that he would never let her fight alone. But fate has its own way of answering vows. It was a late afternoon when a shadow appeared on the horizon. A rider approached Dry Creek, his horse slow but steady, his figure cloaked in dust. The townsfolk gathered, suspicious as always of strangers. He dismounted with practiced ease, his eyes sharp, his presence quiet but commanding. He did not look like a preacher, nor a rancher, nor an outlaw. There was something different in the way he carried himself, something that drew curiosity even from those who usually looked away. The cowboy watched from the edge of the street, his instincts stirring. This man was not ordinary. He moved like someone who had seen war, carried loss, and learned skills no one in Dry Creek could imagine. And when the stranger finally spoke, his words cut through the air like the crack of a whip. I hear itself had shaped him into something immovable. The cowboy stood at the edge of the street, watching. His instincts prickled. Something about the stranger reminded him of the battlefields he had left behind, men who had carried wounds both visible and invisible. When the stranger finally locked eyes with him, the weight of recognition passed between them. Two men, both marked by war in their own ways. That evening the cowboy invited him to sit at their table. His bride watched quietly, her heart caught between fear and hope. She had seen enough men in Dry Creek to know when someone carried danger. But there was something else in the stranger, something deeper. Over a plate of bread and stew, the man finally spoke of himself. His name was Elias Kane. Once a doctor during the war, he had traveled battlefields littered with broken bodies. He had seen men who could not walk rise again, and men who were whole fall apart under pain. He had studied more than medicine. He had studied survival. His methods were not bound by law or by church. He worked in ways others called unholy, but he called them necessary. I've watched bones knit where they shouldn't, tendons stretched beyond their limits, and souls claw their way back when the world swore they were finished. Elias said, his voice low, deliberate. But nothing comes without cost. Her eyes widened. She dared not speak, but hope surged in her chest like wildfire. The cowboy, however, stayed cautious. He knew the kind of men war created, men who carried both knowledge and shadows. Elias leaned forward, his gaze steady. "I can help her," he said. "I can give her a chance to stand, to move, maybe even to dance. But you must understand, it will not be easy, and it will not be free." The cowboy's jaw tightened. "What cost?" Elias gave a thin smile, one that carried no warmth. "Not coin. I've no need for gold. The cost is pain. She will endure more than she has ever known. Muscles will tear. Bones may break again before they mend. She will want to give up, and if she does, no doctor in this world but steady. If there is a chance, even a small one, then I must take it. I will not spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been." The cowboy turned to her, his eyes heavy with both love and fear. He saw the fire in her that had been growing since the day she whispered she would not remain the same. She was ready to risk everything. Was he? His silence stretched long, the weight of decision pressing down. To agree meant to open the door to unimaginable suffering. To refuse meant condemning her to dreams that would forever remain unreachable. Elias broke the silence, his voice sharp and cutting. "Understand this. I can open the door, but walking through it will be her choice every single day. And you, cowboy, if you falter, if you doubt, you will be the one who breaks her." The words struck deep. They were not just about her. They were about him. The burden would be shared, and his strength would be tested as much as hers. The lantern flickered, casting long shadows across the cabin walls. The air grew tense, heavy with the weight of fate closing in. She looked at him, her eyes pleading not for protection, but for belief. At last he drew in a slow breath. "If she's willing, then so am I." Elias leaned back, nodding as though he had heard this before. But his next words froze the room cold. "Good. Then you must be ready, for the cure might break her before it saves her." Every promise of healing came wrapped in pain. The first morning of Elias Kane's treatment began before sunrise. The cowboy woke to the rasp of the stranger's voice. "Bring her outside." The desert air was cool, but the weight of what awaited them was heavy. The bride sat quietly, her face pale, her hands folded in her lap. She knew what she had agreed to. Yet when the cowboy lifted her gently from her chair, she felt the tremor of fear rush through her veins. Elias had prepared a space near the barn. Ropes hung from beams, planks of wood had been reinforced, and strange contraptions, metal braces, leather straps, pulling. Yet each dawn, when Elias demanded more, she rose. Not because the pain lessened, it never did, but because her will had grown sharper than her fear. The cowboy bore his own torment. Watching the woman he loved suffer tore at him more than bullets ever had. Her cries clawed at his chest, and sometimes he nearly begged Elias to stop. But whenever he looked into her eyes, he saw not surrender, but fire. She wanted this. She needed this. And so he stayed, holding her up, carrying her when she collapsed, whispering words no one else would hear. The town noticed. Whispers turned into jeers whenever the cowboy rode in for supplies. "Training a cripple to dance," they sneered. "Might as well teach a horse to fly." Laughter followed him down every street. Yet even in mockery, curiosity grew. People began to linger near the edge of the ranch at dusk, drawn by the sound of Elias's harsh commands, by the sight of the bride trembling but refusing to fall. They laughed, yes, but their laughter was thinner now, sharpened by unease. Progress was slow, cruelly slow. For weeks her legs barely moved an inch more than the day before. But one evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, she managed to stand for 3 breaths without support. It was nothing to the world, but to her and the cowboy, it was a miracle. He caught her before she collapsed, his arms tight around her, tears burning in his eyes. She smiled through her pain, whispering, "See, I told you, I will not remain this way forever." Yet for every small triumph came crushing setbacks. Some days her body refused to cooperate at all, locking in spasms that left her screaming. Other days the progress seemed to vanish entirely, undoing weeks of effort in a single cruel twist of fate. She wept in the cowboy's arms, doubting herself, doubting the dream. And still Elias pressed forward, relentless. "You think pain is your enemy?" he said one night as she sobbed. Thunder split the sky, and Elias demanded one more exercise, one more step beyond her limit. The cowboy wanted to object, but the bride insisted. Her face was pale, her body trembling, but her eyes burned with determination. She gripped the ropes, braced herself, and tried to lift her leg higher than ever before. For a moment it seemed possible, her body straining, her teeth clenched. But then came the sound. A crack, a scream. Her body buckled, collapsing in a heap. The cowboy rushed forward, gathering her in his arms, his heart pounding with terror. She was unconscious, her face twisted in pain. Elias knelt beside her, his expression grim, his hand pressing against her trembling leg. After a long silence, he spoke words that froze the cowboy's blood. "It may be the end. Love can heal, but sometimes it can also destroy." When Elias uttered the words, "It may be the end," the cowboy felt his chest cave in. He held her limp body, her breath shallow, her skin pale as the storm outside roared like a warning. His heart thundered with a question he had tried to ignore since the first day of training. Was he saving her, or destroying her? For hours she lay unconscious. The cowboy sat at her bedside, his hand never leaving hers. Elias worked in silence, applying compresses, whispering words the cowboy barely understood. Time crawled, every second stretching like an eternity. He replayed every choice in his mind. The moment he welcomed Elias, the moment he agreed to the pain, the moment he promised to let her chase the dream. Was this what his love had led her to? Broken bones, endless agony, a body on the edge of collapse. But just before dawn, her eyes flickered open. Weak though she was, their opinions did not matter. All that mattered was her. But the truth was harsher. The cruelty of the town was not only breaking her body, it was tearing their marriage apart. Nights grew heavier. The cowboy often sat awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he was failing her. She, in turn, wrestled with guilt, wondering if she was the reason his world had turned into constant battle. They argued, not about love, for that was never in question, but about limits. He begged her to rest, she begged him to believe. Their voices rose, then fell, until silence stretched between them like a canyon. And yet, in that silence, something unshakable held them together. Even when anger clouded their words, even when despair clung to them like dust, their hands found each other. Love was still there, raw and bruised, but alive. Elias saw it all. One night after another grueling session, he looked the cowboy in the eye. "You're asking the wrong question," he said. "It's not whether she can endure. It's whether you can. Because if you falter, if your faith cracks, she will fall with you." The words stung because they were true. The cowboy realized the real breaking point might not be her body. It might be his spirit. Days passed and the pressure only grew. Her training resumed slowly, every movement wrapped in risk, every exercise haunted by the memory of that stormy collapse. The town watched from afar, ready to laugh at another failure. She pressed on, determined, her face pale but her eyes unyielding. He stood by her side, caught between admiration and terror, knowing he could lose her at any moment. Until one evening, when the weight of it all finally erupted. He had ridden into town for supplies, his jaw clenched, his eyes fixed forward. As he passed the saloon, a man called out, loud enough for all to hear. "How's your crippled dancer, cowboy? Broken bones make fine music." The laughter that followed was cruel and sharp, cutting deeper than any bullet, but on the entire town. When the cowboy spoke, even his enemies fell silent. The saloon doors swung open with a groan, and the sound of boots striking wood echoed like a drumbeat. The cowboy stood in the center of Dry Creek's dusty street, his eyes scanning the crowd. Men leaned against railings, women whispered behind curtains. Children clung to doorframes. Every corner of the town held an audience. His voice broke the hush. Low, steady, yet burning with fire. "You've mocked her enough. You've mocked me enough. I've swallowed your insults. I've carried your scorn. But I'll carry it no more. My wife's name will not be spit from your mouths again, unless you're ready to draw against me." The words cracked like thunder. For years, Dry Creek had laughed behind his back, confident that silence made him weak. But silence was gone. In its place stood fury. At first, no one moved. Then, as though emboldened by the crowd, one ranch hand spat on the ground and muttered, "She'll never walk, cowboy, and you'll never wash the shame off her." The cowboy's hand shifted toward his holster. The street tensed, breaths caught in throats. But instead of drawing, he stepped forward, his voice rising. "You call her shame? You fools. She's braver than any of you. While you sit and drink and laugh at another's pain, she bleeds for her dream. Every tear she sheds is stronger than your hollow laughter. Every step she fights for is worth more than your whole lives combined." The words sliced through the air sharper than any blade. Some men lowered their eyes, ashamed. Others clenched their jaws, angered at being called out. The crowd was no longer united. It was breaking in two. From the edge of the saloon, a woman spoke softly, almost to herself. "He's right." Heads turned, startled. It was Clara, the preacher's daughter, who had once sneered the loudest. She stared at the cowboy with wide eyes, shaken by the conviction in his voice. But others were unmoved. "You've gone mad," another man shouted, to stir questions. He was a healer, yes, but his methods were harsh, his knowledge unusual. Whispers swirled. Was he truly a doctor? Or something darker? That night, after the crowd dispersed in anger and unease, the cowboy confronted him. Why are you helping us, Elias? What do you stand to gain? Elias's gaze was steady, but there was a flicker in his eyes, a shadow he could not hide. I told you, I've seen men broken and rise again. I've seen miracles forged from torment. I help because I know it's possible. But you're right. There is more to it than that. The cowboy's jaw tightened. Then speak it plain. Elias hesitated, his voice lowering. Not yet, but soon you'll know. And when you do, you may wish I had never set foot in Dry Creek. The unease deepened in the cowboy's chest. For all his wife's progress, for all the hope Elias had sparked, something about him was shifting, from savior to something more dangerous. Days passed and the town's division grew sharper. At the saloon, half the men raised glasses in grudging respect for the cowboy's courage, while the other half cursed his name louder than ever. At the church, whispers of sin and divine punishment clashed with murmurs of admiration for the bride's fight. Dry Creek had never been united, but now it teetered on the edge of fracture. The bride herself felt the change most keenly. She walked, or rather limped, through town with her head higher than before. Some nodded respectfully now. Others spat at her feet. But for the first time, she no longer felt invisible. She was seen, loved by some, hated by others, but seen. Still, suspicion gnawed at her too. Elias watched her every move with the eyes of a man carrying secrets. Sometimes, she caught him staring at her not as a patient, but as something else, something unknown. Then came the night the truth slipped loose. The cowboy had gone to fetch water when he overheard Elias speaking to himself in the barn. His voice was whispers of failure from every mouth in town. All of it had led to this night. Elias himself declared it. One last attempt, he said. If she cannot rise today, she may never rise at all. The cowboy's heart pounded like a war drum. He had seen her break before, seen her collapse in storms of pain, seen her body tremble under the weight of her dream. But never had the stakes been so clear. Tonight, she would either stand, or her dream would be buried forever. The cabin was cleared for space, lanterns lit, shadows trembling on the walls. The bride sat in her chair, hands gripping the armrests, her breath slow, deliberate. Elias knelt before her, checking her legs, whispering his final instructions. Breathe with the pain, not against it. Take its fire, make it yours. And when you rise, do not think of them. Think only of him. His eyes flicked toward the cowboy. The cowboy stepped forward, kneeling before her, his calloused hand slipping into hers. I'll be here, he said, voice steady though his insides shook. I won't let go. She smiled faintly. Not the smile of a woman certain of victory, but of one who had nothing left to lose. Outside, shadows stirred. Though no one was invited, the town had gathered like vultures circling carrion. They peered through windows, crowded at the porch, hushed voices carrying disbelief and cruel anticipation. She'll fall again, someone muttered. She'll break herself for good this time. Yet still, they watched, unable to turn away. Inside, the silence thickened. The bride closed her eyes, inhaling as though preparing to step into battle. Her knuckles whitened around the cowboy's hand. Elias's voice was sharp, commanding. Now. She pressed her feet against the floor. Her body trembled instantly, muscles screaming in rebellion. The pain surged, her face twisted, and a gasp escaped her lips. The cowboy tightened his grip, whispering, I'm here. Take my strength. For a moment she faltered, her body threatening collapse. The room seemed to lean forward, breathless, the whispers outside thick with doubt. Clock. Seconds dragged into eternities. Outside, the crowd grew restless. Some gasped at the sight through the glass. Others laughed cruelly. "It's hopeless," a man sneered. But even his voice carried a tremor. For what they were witnessing was no ordinary struggle. It was defiance itself, embodied. And then, against all reason, against all odds, her body began to rise. First, an inch, then 2. Her knees wobbled, her frame bent, but her will did not break. The cowboy braced himself, ready to catch her if she fell, but he held his ground, refusing to rob her of the chance. Her breath tore through her lungs, her body shook violently, but she was moving upward, like a tree forcing itself through stone. At that moment the cowboy saw not weakness, not frailty, but glory. He saw a woman standing not only for herself, but against the entire weight of Dry Creek. The townsfolk fell silent. No jeers, no laughter, no whispers, only stunned, disbelieving silence as the impossible unfolded before them. The cowboy leaned in, his forehead nearly touching hers, whispering the only words that mattered. "Don't let go." Her lips parted, her voice barely more than air, yet steady with unbreakable fire. She gripped his hand tighter, whispered, "Don't let go," and rose. For the first time, the saloon music stopped not from silence, but from shock. The moment was fragile, like glass balanced on the edge of a table. She was standing, trembling as though every bone in her body was at war with itself, yet upright, defying months of scorn, ridicule, and despair. The cowboy held her hand, his palm rough and steady, anchoring her as the crowd outside peered through windows and door frames, jaws slack, eyes wide. For Dry Creek, this night had been expected to end in collapse. They had gathered in secret to witness her fail one last time, to watch her dreams shatter so they could return to their laughter. But now their smirks had cut. Every scar found its answer. "Another," he urged softly, his arm wrapping around her waist, steady but not carrying. He would not rob her of this victory. She had to fight, and she was fighting. Her jaw tightened, her breath ragged, and again she moved. A second step, more labored than the first, but stronger. She faltered midway, her knees bending dangerously, and a murmur rippled outside as though the crowd waited for her collapse. But she did not fall. The cowboy steadied her, his eyes fierce, and she pressed on. And then, like a tide turning, the room shifted. This was no longer walking, this was something else, something higher. He drew her closer, his hand guiding her back, then forward, letting her body follow his rhythm. Their steps were uneven, fragile, but their connection turned the fragility into grace. She leaned into him, and he carried her, not with his strength, but with his unwavering faith. It was a dance. The world stilled. Across the street a fiddle fell silent mid-song, the saloon's usual roar replaced by stunned hush. Glasses froze halfway to lips. Dice sat untouched on tables. For the first time in Dry Creek's memory, noise itself seemed ashamed to interrupt. The cowboy whispered into her hair, his voice breaking, "Do you trust me?" Her answer came breathless, yet certain. "Always." With that vow, he guided her into a slow turn. Her dress swayed, her feet dragged but found their place, and her body, though unsteady, moved with purpose. The mockery of years was overturned in a heartbeat. What once was weakness now became defiance, beauty born not from perfection, but from unyielding will. Outside, faces pressed against glass. Men who had laughed spateless now gripped the window frame, their mouths agape. Women who had whispered venom clutched their shawls, tears threatening their eyes, though pride forced them back. Even children, once cruel in their mimicry, stared wide-eyed, realizing the cripple they had mocked was stronger. They moved together, until even Elias, stoic, burdened, unflinching Elias, lowered his head, his eyes glistening with the memory of a wife he could not save. He whispered softly, too faint for anyone but himself to hear, "Forgive me, Anna. Forgive me." The dance slowed, her body exhausted, her strength spent. She leaned heavier against him, her legs trembling dangerously. But she refused to stop. "One more," she gasped. "One more step." And he gave it to her. Together they took that last step, holding on to one another as though the entire world balanced on their embrace. For a heartbeat, silence reigned again. The dance was done. The miracle had been seen. The impossible had been made flesh. The cowboy kissed her hair, his voice breaking with pride. "You did it. My God, you did it." She smiled weakly, her voice barely a whisper. "We did it." The crowd began to disperse slowly, some ashamed, some transformed, others lost in thought. Dry Creek would never be the same again. The couple had carved their place in its history, not as figures of ridicule, but as legends of defiance. But not every face in that crowd softened. The cowboy noticed it near the edge of the window, half hidden in shadow. A man stood still, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. While the others clapped, he did not move. While others wept or smiled, his lips curled in contempt. His gaze was sharp, cold, burning with something darker than scorn. The cowboy's chest tightened. He recognized that look. It was not disbelief nor shame, but hate. While the town bowed in awe, one man refused to smile. And in his silence, the promise of danger grew darker than ever before. Redemption came, but peace was still far away. The night after the dance, Dry Creek did not sound the same. The usual laughter at the saloon was subdued. The gossip at the mercantile softened into whispers, and the mocking eyes that once followed the cowboy and his wife now carried something different, uncertain respect. Could sense the eyes that now lingered too long, the smiles that hid envy, the silences that carried threats. Respect had come, but it was fragile, poisoned by those unwilling to surrender their hate. Inside their small cabin, however, the world felt different. For the first time since their marriage, laughter returned to their table. She still ached, still trembled with every step. But now those steps were not buried in shame. They were celebrated in whispers between the two of them, in late-night promises, in quiet moments where he held her close and told her she was more than the town could ever deserve. One evening, as they sat by the fire, she leaned against him, her voice steady but wistful. "Do you think this place will ever see us as we are? Not as they want us to be?" The cowboy was silent for a long time. Then he answered, "Maybe. Or maybe it doesn't matter. Because I see you. That's enough for me." But she shook her head gently. "No, love. You've given me the strength to rise. But I won't live the rest of my life proving myself to people who will never believe. I want more. For us." Her words struck him like the crack of a whip. He had always carried the weight of Dry Creek's judgment, always fought for her dignity in the town's shadow. But now, for the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a future beyond those dusty streets, where her name was not whispered in mockery, where their love was not caged by cruel eyes. They began to plan quietly, speaking of towns beyond the horizon, of new land where they could build a home without the weight of scorn. He promised her he would ride with her anywhere, even if it meant leaving behind the only life he had ever known. For her, he would start again. But the town did not let go easily. The day after their plans took root, Elias approached the cowboy. His face was grim, his voice lower than usual. "Leaving may save you," he said, "but it will not erase them. Some men do not forgive being proven wrong, and some men would rather bury a miracle than admit it exists," silently vowing to protect that victory, no matter where the road led them. By dusk, the wagon was ready. Their horses stood saddled, the trail stretching endless before them. The town lingered at the edges, watching, some in quiet blessing, others in silent resentment. It was a strange farewell, filled with both respect and hostility, as though Dry Creek itself could not decide whether to let them go in peace or curse their departure. The bride climbed onto the wagon seat, her hand slipping into the cowboy's. For the first time in years, she felt light. Beyond the horizon lay something the town could never give them: freedom. But just as the wheels began to turn, the sound of hoofbeats thundered across the dirt road. A rider appeared, galloping fast, his coat flapping in the wind, his face shadowed by the setting sun. The crowd turned, murmurs rising like sparks from a fire. He pulled his horse to a halt in front of the wagon, his chest heaving, his eyes wild. "Cowboy!" he shouted. "You can't leave, not now. There's news that will change everything." The journey to freedom froze before it could begin, as the rider's words promised a storm greater than any they had faced before. What would you have done if you were in the cowboy's boots that night? Fight the town, or walk away? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your side. If this story held you till the end, hit that subscribe button, because the next chapter might just change everything again. Share this with someone who still believes love can't defy the odds. And remember, every legend begins with one impossible step.